A suffering so common we've almost normalized it, woven it into the fabric of what we call romance, devotion, even love itself. It's the pain of loving someone so intensely that their absence feels like annihilation. The terror of losing them, the desperate need for reassurance, the quiet erosion of your own truth in service of keeping them close. We call this love, but what if it's something else entirely? Consider the architecture of most human relationships. We meet someone who catalyzes something within us, a feeling of completeness, of being seen, of mattering. They become the answer to a question we didn't know we were asking. And then, almost imperceptibly, we begin to build our sense of safety, our identity, even our worthiness around their continued presence. We don't just love them, we need them, and in that need lies the seed of every heartbreak, every betrayal, every desperate compromise of self. The questioner who speaks of 90% of their suffering emerging from love is not describing an uncommon experience. They're articulating the fundamental crisis of attachment-based relating, the way we've been taught to love from a place of incompleteness, reaching desperately across the void for someone to make us whole. But what if there's another way? What if it's possible to love with a depth and richness that surpasses anything attachment can offer, yet without the suffering, the possessiveness, the quiet violence we inflict upon ourselves and others when we love from fear? This isn't about becoming cold or detached. It's not about protecting yourself from intimacy or building walls around your heart. It's about something far more radical. Loving from a place of such profound freedom that the love itself becomes unconditional, uncontaminated by fear, unspoiled by the desperate need for things to be a certain way. This essay explores that possibility, the nature of love that springs from wholeness rather than lack, from being rather than becoming. It's an investigation into how we might relate to others with full-hearted presence while remaining unshakably rooted in ourselves. It's about the difference between loving someone and needing them to complete you, between intimacy and dependency, between devotion and desperation. The architecture of attachment. The origins of desperate love. To understand love without attachment, we must first understand attachment itself, not as a moral failing, but as a psychological pattern with deep evolutionary roots. Human beings are born uniquely helpless among mammals. Our survival depends entirely on attachment to caregivers. An infant separated from their mother doesn't just feel lonely, they experience it as a threat to their existence, because it is. This primordial experience becomes encoded in our nervous system. Attachment equals survival, separation equals death. These aren't metaphors in the infant mind. They're biological truths. As we grow, the threat becomes less literal, but the pattern persists. We carry this ancient programming into our adult relationships. When someone we love threatens to leave, when they withdraw affection, when we sense their attention drifting elsewhere, something primal activates. The rational mind knows we'll survive, but deeper circuits are firing alarm signals. Danger, abandonment, annihilation. This is why romantic rejection can feel like dying, why the end of a relationship can shatter us in ways that seem disproportionate to the situation, why we sometimes find ourselves saying or doing things in the grip of relationship anxiety that we'd never do otherwise. The primitive brain doesn't distinguish between an infant being abandoned and an adult being broken up with. Both trigger the same fundamental terror. Understanding this isn't about judging ourselves for these reactions. It's about recognizing that attachment-based love operates from a very old, very deep place in our psyche, a place where love and survival are inextricably linked. The 3 patterns of insecure attachment. Psychologists have identified distinct patterns in how this fundamental attachment drive manifests in relationships. These aren't personality types, but strategies we develop in response to early relational experiences. The anxious attacher lives in constant fear of abandonment. They need frequent reassurance, read threat into ambiguity, and often sacrifice their own needs to keep the relationship stable. Their love feels urgent, consuming. They're hypervigilant to any sign of withdrawal, quick to perceive rejection, even when none exists. In their partnerships, they often find themselves shape-shifting, becoming whatever they think will keep their partner close. The thought of being alone triggers profound anxiety, not just loneliness, but a sense of losing themselves. The avoidant attacher has learned that depending on others is dangerous. They value independence above all else, keep people at arm's length emotionally, and often withdraw when relationships become too intimate. They're uncomfortable with vulnerability, theirs or others. Their relationships tend to be characterized by emotional distance, difficulty with commitment, and a pattern of leaving before they can be left. They genuinely crave connection, but have learned to suppress that need, convinced that self-sufficiency is safety. The disorganized attacher wants intimacy, but fears it simultaneously. They vacillate between clinging and pushing away, between desperate need and sudden withdrawal. Their early experiences taught them that the source of comfort is also the source of pain. In relationships, they're caught in an impossible bind. Come close and risk annihilation, stay distant and suffer isolation. This creates relationships characterized by chaos, intensity, and profound confusion. Most people don't fit neatly into these categories. We carry elements of multiple patterns, and our attachment style can shift depending on context, partner, and life circumstances. But these patterns reveal something crucial. Insecure attachment isn't about not loving enough. It's about loving from fear, from the belief that we are fundamentally incomplete or unsafe without the other person. The transactional nature of need-based love. When we love from attachment, the relationship becomes inherently transactional, even if unconsciously so. We're not truly relating to the other person as they are. We're relating to what they provide for our sense of security, identity, or completeness. This shows up in subtle ways. The anxious attacher who constantly texts isn't primarily expressing affection. They're seeking reassurance that the connection still exists, that abandonment isn't imminent. The avoidant attacher who pulls away when things get serious isn't being cruel. They're protecting themselves from the vulnerability that intimacy demands. Both are transacting, negotiating, managing their internal state through the relationship. Consider how this manifests in everyday interactions. When your partner is late coming home and you feel that spike of anxiety, then relief when they arrive, followed by anger, what's actually happening? You're not responding to them as a person. You're responding to your own fear of abandonment, your need for the security their presence provides, your resentment that they have the power to make you feel this way. When you find yourself trying to change your partner, wishing they were more affectionate, less critical, more ambitious, less anxious, you're revealing the transactional nature of the love. They're not quite doing what you need them to do to maintain your internal equilibrium. The love is conditional on them being a certain way, providing certain things, maintaining the role you've assigned them in your psychological economy. This doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human, but it does mean the love is contaminated by need, and need, however understandable, creates suffering. The most painful manifestation is when we compromise our own truth to keep the relationship intact. The person who stays silent about their needs because voicing them might create conflict. The person who suppresses their authentic self to be more palatable to their partner. The person who tolerates mistreatment because being alone feels more dangerous than being diminished. These compromises don't come from love. They come from fear, from the belief that we cannot survive, cannot be whole, cannot be okay without this specific person continuing to play their role in our life. This is the heart of attachment-based relating. The other person becomes an object in service of our psychological needs, rather than a subject we meet in genuine intimacy. We're not really with them. We're with our idea of them, our need for them, our fear of losing them. Why attachment creates suffering. The suffering inherent in attachment-based love isn't accidental, it's structural. Here's why. First, attachment makes us vulnerable to conditions we cannot control. When your well-being depends on another person behaving a certain way, you live in constant precarity. They might change, they might leave, they might stop loving you, and there's ultimately nothing you can do to guarantee otherwise. This creates a baseline anxiety that permeates the relationship. Second, attachment requires the other person to remain fixed in a role that serves your needs. But people aren't static. They grow, change, develop new interests and perspectives. They become who they're becoming, not who you need them to be. When we love from attachment, every change in our partner feels like a threat because it might mean they'll no longer fulfill the function they serve in our psychological architecture. Third, attachment creates possessiveness. When someone is functionally necessary for your sense of wholeness or safety, you become invested in controlling them, in limiting their freedom, in ensuring they remain yours. This possessiveness might be subtle, monitoring their phone, feeling threatened by their friendships, needing to know where they are at all times. Or it might be overt. But either way, it transforms love into a kind of ownership, and ownership is inherently violent to the human spirit. Fourth, attachment makes intimacy paradoxically difficult. True intimacy requires vulnerability, the willingness to be fully seen, but when we're attached, we can't afford to be fully seen. We're too busy managing the other person's perception of us, trying to be what we think will keep them close. We perform, we curate, we hide the parts of ourselves we fear might push them away. The person who supposedly knows us best doesn't really know us at all. Fifth, attachment creates a constant low-level resentment because when we're attached, we're giving our power away. The other person holds our sense of safety, our self-worth, our happiness in their hands, and on some level we resent them for it. We resent needing them. We resent our own powerlessness. This resentment poisons the relationship, emerging in criticism, passive aggression, scorekeeping, and the thousand small cruelties couples inflict upon each other. Finally, and perhaps most devastatingly, attachment prevents us from experiencing love in its fullest expression, because attachment is fundamentally about what we can get, not what we can give. It's about securing our needs, not celebrating the other person's existence. When we're attached, we're not free to simply delight in someone, to appreciate them without agenda, to love them without the contamination of need. The questioner, who speaks of 90% of their suffering coming from love, is identifying this truth. Attachment-based love, no matter how culturally normalized, creates enormous suffering. Not because love itself is suffering, but because this particular expression of love from lack, from fear, from need, inherently generates pain. Part 2. The illusion of romantic completion. The cultural mythology of the one. We're taught from our earliest encounters with story that romantic love is about finding the person who completes us. Every fairy tale, every rom-com, every love song reinforces this narrative. You are half of something, and out there exists your other half. When you find them, you'll finally be whole. You'll finally be home. You'll finally be enough. This is one of the most pervasive and damaging myths in human culture. The idea that another person can complete you presupposes that you are fundamentally incomplete. It suggests that the solution to your internal sense of lack exists outside yourself in the form of a romantic partner. It teaches you to look for salvation in someone else's eyes, to build your sense of wholeness on the foundation of being chosen, being loved, being kept. This myth shapes everything about how we approach relationships. It's why we feel that desperate urgency when we meet someone who seems to fit the bill. This might be the one who finally makes me whole. It's why breakups feel so catastrophic. Without them, I return to being incomplete, insufficient, half of something. It's why we tolerate mistreatment, compromise our values, and abandon ourselves. Because the alternative, being alone, means returning to that original state of incompleteness. It's why we move so quickly from one relationship to the next, unable to bear the space in between. It's why we become so desperate for commitment, for labels, for proof that we've been chosen, because being chosen by the one is the only way to escape our fundamental insufficiency. But here's what this myth obscures. You were never incomplete. The sense of lack you're trying to fill through romantic love isn't a lack of another person. It's a disconnection from yourself, from your own being, from the wholeness that was always already there. When you meet someone who makes you feel complete, what's actually happening isn't that they're adding something you were missing. They're catalyzing a state of wholeness, presence, and aliveness that was always available within you but that you'd lost access to. They're not completing you. They're reminding you of your completeness. This distinction is everything, because if they're completing you, then losing them means returning to incompleteness. But if they're simply triggering your recognition of a wholeness that's inherent, then the wholeness doesn't depend on them. You can appreciate and enjoy their presence while knowing that what you're experiencing through them is something you can access in other ways, through other relationships, through connection with yourself. The narrowness of romantic love as primary aspiration. When the height of your aspiration is finding a romantic partner, you've limited yourself dramatically. Not because romantic relationships aren't valuable, they can be profound vehicles for growth, intimacy, and joy, but because making them the primary organizing principle of your life creates a narrowness that becomes its own prison. Think about what happens when romantic love becomes the answer to every question. Feeling lonely, find a partner, feeling purposeless, fall in love, feeling inadequate, get someone to validate you through their desire and commitment. The partner becomes the solution to every internal deficit, the remedy for every form of suffering. This creates relationships that are functionally therapeutic rather than genuinely intimate. You're not meeting another person in the fullness of who they are. You're using them as a fix for your internal state, and they can feel it, even if they can't name it. They can sense that they're not being loved for themselves, but for the function they serve. Moreover, this narrowness creates a life that's inherently unstable, because everything is built on the foundation of this one relationship. Your happiness, your sense of meaning, your social life, your identity, all of it revolves around this person. When the relationship is good, life is good. When the relationship struggles, everything crumbles. This isn't love, it's dependency, and dependency, however romantic we make it sound, is a form of bondage. The alternative isn't to devalue romantic relationships, it's to recognize that they're one expression of love among many, one form of connection in a life rich with connections. When you have deep friendships, meaningful work, creative pursuits, spiritual practice, community involvement, and a genuine relationship with yourself, romantic partnership becomes something you choose from overflow rather than something you need for survival. From this place, you can actually enjoy romantic love more fully. because you're not asking it to carry everything. You're not demanding that one person be your entire source of intimacy, meaning, validation, and joy. You're bringing your wholeness to the relationship rather than asking the relationship to create your wholeness. The violence of romantic desperateness. There's something particularly painful about loving someone out of desperateness for both people. When you're desperate for love, you cannot afford to be honest. You cannot afford to disagree, to have boundaries, to risk conflict. You cannot afford to be fully yourself because some part of yourself might be the part that drives them away. So you perform, you edit, you suppress, you become who you think they want you to be. This is a form of self-abandonment, and it creates a relationship with a ghost. They're not in relationship with you, they're in relationship with the version of you that you're presenting because you're desperate to keep them. On their side, they sense something is off. They can feel that you're not fully present, not fully authentic. They can sense your fear, your need, your willingness to compromise yourself. And on some level, it repels them. Not because they're cruel, but because desperation is inherently unattractive. It signals that you don't value yourself, which makes it hard for them to value you. Worse, your desperateness puts enormous pressure on them. They become responsible for your emotional stability, your happiness, your sense of worth. That's a terrible burden. They can't just be themselves, make their own choices, live their own life. Every decision they make impacts your entire internal state. If they want space, you fall apart. If they're less affectionate one day, you spiral. If they want to pursue their own interests, you feel abandoned. This creates resentment on both sides. You resent them for having the power to devastate you. They resent you for making them responsible for your well-being. Neither of you can relax. Neither of you can be authentic. The relationship becomes a careful dance of management and manipulation rather than genuine meeting. And the sad irony is that the desperation, which comes from fear of losing them, is often what drives them away. Your grip tightens, they pull back. You become more anxious, more clingy, more desperate for reassurance. They become more distant, more suffocated, more exhausted by the weight of your need. This dynamic plays out in relationships everywhere, and it's devastating for both people. The desperate person suffers constant anxiety and gradually erodes their sense of self. The person being desperately loved suffers the burden of being someone else's entire emotional ecosystem and gradually loses respect for their partner. Neither of these is love. Love can't coexist with desperation because desperation is fundamentally about fear. Fear of loss, fear of aloneness, fear of your own insufficiency. The promise of private love. Yet there's something genuinely beautiful about the aspiration toward romantic partnership. The desire for someone who knows you deeply, who chooses you specifically, who creates with you a private world of shared history, inside jokes, and intimate knowledge. This isn't pathological, it's human. The question isn't whether to desire romantic love, it's what quality of being you bring to it. When you've done the work of coming home to yourself, when you know who you are independent of anyone's validation, when you've established a life of meaning and connection that doesn't depend on romantic partnership, then you can enter romantic love from a completely different place. You're not looking for someone to complete you. You're looking for someone to share the journey with. You're not seeking salvation. You're seeking companionship. You're not trying to escape yourself. You're offering yourself. From this place, romantic love becomes less about need and more about gift. You have something to offer, your presence, your authenticity, your capacity for intimacy, and you can receive what they offer without making it the foundation of your existence. This creates relationships with entirely different qualities. There's more ease because there's less desperation. There's more authenticity because there's less fear. There's more generosity because you're not constantly calculating whether you're getting enough. There's more genuine intimacy because you can afford to be fully seen. The private love that emerges from two whole people meeting is something far richer than what attachment-based love can create. It's not about completion, it's about multiplication. Two complete beings creating something together that neither could create alone. But this is only possible when you first completed the other journey, the journey back to yourself. Part 3. Relationship as Spiritual Technology. The unique revelatory power of partnership. Here's a paradox. While romantic attachment creates enormous suffering, romantic relationships themselves can be one of the most powerful tools for psychological and spiritual growth available to human beings. Why? Because romantic partnership, particularly the deep committed kind, has a unique ability to expose aspects of yourself that remain hidden in other contexts. The intimacy, the vulnerability, the daily proximity, the stakes, all of it creates conditions where your unconscious patterns, your unexamined beliefs, your deepest wounds rise to the surface. You can maintain a spiritual practice for years, meditate daily, read all the wisdom literature, have profound insights about the nature of reality, and still remain blind to certain aspects of your psychology. Then you enter an intimate relationship, and suddenly everything you thought you'd transcended reveals itself to be alive and well. The jealousy you thought you'd evolved beyond, the need for control you believed you'd released, the fear of abandonment you were certain you'd healed, the ways you manipulate for safety, the ways you withdraw when threatened, the ways you project your internal state onto your partner's behavior. Romantic partnership brings all of it into the light. This is actually the gift of relationship, though it often feels like a curse, because you can't do deep work on psychological patterns you can't see. You can't transform what remains unconscious. Relationship, through its very intensity and intimacy, makes the unconscious conscious. Think about how this works. In casual friendships or professional relationships, you can maintain your persona fairly easily. You present your best self, hide your insecurities, manage others' perception of you. But when someone sees you every day, when they're there through your worst moments, when they're intimate with your body and your habits and your vulnerabilities, you can't maintain the mask. Moreover, the stakes of romantic relationships ensure that your core wounds get activated. A casual friend flaking on plans might be mildly annoying. Your romantic partner doing the same thing might trigger profound feelings of abandonment, rejection, or unworthiness. The higher the stakes, the deeper the activation. This is why relationship therapists often say that you don't choose your partner consciously. Your unconscious chooses them. You're drawn to people who will activate your core wounds in a way that creates the possibility for healing, not because the universe is cruel, but because healing requires bringing wounds to consciousness, and relationship is one of the most effective ways to do that. The mirror of projection. One of the most powerful revelatory functions of romantic relationship is how thoroughly it reveals your projections. Projection is the psychological mechanism by which you attribute to others what actually belongs to your own internal experience. You think your partner is being distant when actually you're feeling disconnected from yourself. You think they're being controlling when actually you're struggling with your own need for control. You think they're making you angry when actually they're triggering anger that already exists within you. In everyday life, you can sustain projections fairly easily. You can blame circumstances, other people, bad luck for your internal state. But in an intimate relationship, particularly with someone you live with, the projection mechanism becomes obvious. Here's a common example. You come home from work, feeling stressed and disconnected from yourself. Your partner greets you cheerfully and wants to tell you about their day. Suddenly you feel irritated. You think, why are they being so demanding? Can't they see I need space? They're so insensitive. But what's actually happening? Your partner hasn't changed, they're being their normal self. What's changed is your internal state. You're stressed, you're disconnected, you're not present. And rather than acknowledging that and taking responsibility for it, you project it onto your partner. You make them the problem. Or consider jealousy when you feel threatened by your partner's friendship with someone else. Is the threat real? Or are you projecting your own insecurity, your own sense of inadequacy, your own fear of abandonment onto an external situation? The jealousy feels like it's about their behavior, but it's actually revealing something about your internal landscape. The gift and the difficulty of intimate relationship is that if you're willing to look honestly, you can start to see these projections for what they are. You can start to notice the gap between what's actually happening and what you're telling yourself is happening. You can start to take responsibility for your internal experience rather than making your partner responsible for it. This is enormously challenging work. It requires a willingness to be wrong, to see your own shadow, to acknowledge your own dysfunction. It requires the humility to say, this isn't about you, this is about something in me. But it's also liberating work, because once you can see your projections clearly, you're no longer enslaved by them. You can feel jealousy without acting on it. You can notice irritation without blaming your partner. You can recognize when you're making someone else responsible for your internal state and choose differently. The exposure of dependency. Romantic relationships are also uniquely good at exposing dependency, the ways you're using another person to regulate your emotional state, to validate your worth, to avoid facing aspects of yourself or your life that need attention. This shows up in countless ways: the need for constant reassurance that they still love you, still find you attractive, still choose you, the anxiety when they're not immediately available, when they're focused on something else, when they have their own inner life that doesn't include you. The way their mood determines your mood, their stress becomes your stress, their criticism devastates you. All of this reveals dependency. You've made them responsible for your internal state. And as long as that dependency remains unconscious, you'll remain stuck in it. But relationship has a way of making it conscious. Here's what that looks like. Your partner wants to spend an evening with their friends. If you're dependent, this triggers anxiety. You might not frame it that way. You might tell yourself you're just disappointed, or that you had plans, or that they should prioritize couple time. But underneath, there's anxiety, because their absence means losing access to the regulation they provide. If you're willing to sit with that anxiety rather than immediately acting on it by guilting them, by picking a fight, by creating a reason they need to stay, something interesting happens. You start to see the dependency clearly. You start to recognize that this anxiety isn't about them. It's about your reliance on them for something you need to provide for yourself. Or consider criticism. Your partner makes a critical comment about something you did. If you're dependent on them for your sense of worth, this criticism might send you spiraling. You might become defensive, counterattack, withdraw in hurt. But if you're willing to pause and examine what's happening, you might notice their criticism only has the power to devastate me because I've given them the power to determine my worth. This recognition is both painful and liberating. Painful because it reveals how much power you've given away, how much of your internal stability depends on someone else. Liberating because once you see it, you can start to reclaim that power. You can start to provide for yourself what you've been demanding from them. The path of mutual transformation. When both people in a relationship are willing to use the relationship this way, as a mirror, as a revealer of unconscious patterns, as a path of transformation, something remarkable becomes possible. The relationship becomes a collaborative project of mutual awakening, not in a precious or self-conscious way, but simply in the recognition that each person is going to trigger the other's unfinished business, and that's actually the gift of the partnership. This requires a fundamental shift in how you approach conflict and difficulty in relationship. Instead of seeing problems as evidence that you've chosen wrong, or that the relationship is failing, you see them as invitations to deeper understanding. Instead of defending against what your partner is reflecting to you, you get curious about it. When your partner says, "You always shut down when we try to talk about difficult things," instead of immediately defending yourself or counter-attacking, you can ask, "Is that true? Do I? Why might I do that?" When they express hurt at something you did, instead of explaining why they shouldn't feel hurt, you can sit with the impact you had on them and inquire into what in you created that impact. This doesn't mean accepting abuse or tolerating mistreatment. It means distinguishing between someone attacking you and someone showing you something about yourself. It means being willing to look at your own contribution to relationship dynamics rather than always making the other person the problem. From this place, relationship becomes genuinely developmental. Each conflict becomes an opportunity to see more clearly. Each trigger becomes an invitation to heal something deeper. Each difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice being with discomfort without defending, deflecting, or dissociating. And here's what's interesting. When you approach relationship this way, the quality of intimacy that becomes possible is entirely different from what attachment-based love can create. Because you're actually meeting each other, you're actually seeing each other, you're actually growing together rather than using each other. This is what partnership can be at its highest expression, not someone who completes you, but someone who helps you see yourself more clearly so you can become more whole. The foundation, coming home to yourself. The central work, the work that makes love without attachment possible, is the work of coming home to yourself, of establishing such a deep, stable, intimate relationship with your own being that your sense of safety, worth, and wholeness doesn't depend on external validation or conditions. This isn't narcissism or self-absorption. It's actually the opposite. It's developing the capacity to be with yourself, all of yourself, including the parts you'd rather not acknowledge, without needing to escape into relationship, achievement, substances, or distraction. Most people are remarkably disconnected from themselves. They don't know what they actually feel, what they actually want, what actually matters to them. They've spent so much of their life responding to others' expectations, managing others' perceptions, and avoiding their own internal experience that they've lost touch with the ground of their being. This disconnection is what creates the desperate reaching for relationship. When you don't have a relationship with yourself, when you can't be alone with yourself, when your own company feels unbearable, of course you'll become attached to anyone who makes you feel less alone. You're not seeking them, you're fleeing yourself. Coming home to yourself is the work of reversing this. It's learning to be present with your own experience without immediately trying to change it, fix it, or escape it. It's developing the capacity to sit with difficult emotions without needing someone else to regulate them for you. It's getting curious about your own patterns, your own history, your own psychology without judgment. This work often begins with something simple, just spending time alone. Not distracting yourself, not filling the space with entertainment or activity, but actually being with yourself and noticing what comes up. The anxiety, the restlessness, the voice that says you should be doing something productive, the impulse to check your phone, to reach out to someone, to make plans. All of that reveals your relationship with yourself or lack thereof. If being alone for an evening feels intolerable, that's information. It's showing you how much you depend on external inputs to regulate your internal state. But here's what happens when you develop the capacity to be with yourself. You become interested in yourself. You start to notice the richness of your own inner life, the complexity of your own experience. You develop what might be called good company with yourself. From this place, solitude stops being something to fear and becomes something valuable. Not because you're avoiding relationship, but because you genuinely enjoy your own presence. You have things you want to think about, create, explore. You have a relationship with your own mind that's generative and nourishing. And paradoxically, this makes you much better at relationship, because you're no longer using the other person to flee from yourself. You can be with them from a place of choice rather than need. Excavating your patterns. Part of coming home to yourself is doing the archaeological work of understanding your patterns, particularly your attachment patterns and how they were formed. This isn't about blaming your parents or dwelling in victimhood. It's about understanding the logic of your psychological strategies. You developed your particular way of relating to others for good reason. It made sense given what you experienced. The anxious attachment pattern developed because you learned that love was inconsistent, that you had to work for it, that your needs might or might not be met. The avoidant pattern developed because you learned that depending on others led to disappointment, that you were safer relying on yourself. These patterns were adaptive at the time they formed. They helped you survive emotionally in the circumstances you faced. The problem is they often persist long after those circumstances have changed, creating difficulties in adult relationships. Understanding this creates compassion for yourself. You weren't being difficult or broken or damaged. You were being strategic, doing the best you could with what you knew and what you'd experienced. But understanding also creates choice. Once you can see your patterns clearly, once you can notice yourself defaulting to anxious attachment strategies or avoidance strategies in the moment, you can start to question whether those strategies are still serving you. You can start to choose differently. This work often involves examining specific relationship experiences, particularly early ones, and noticing the conclusions you drew. People always leave. Love has to be earned. Needing someone is dangerous. I'm too much for people. I'm not enough. These core beliefs formed early continue to shape your relationship choices and behaviors unconsciously. But when you bring them into consciousness, when you examine them clearly, you often realize they're not actually true, or they were true in one context, but aren't universally true. You can start to form new beliefs based on your actual adult experience, rather than childhood conclusions. Developing internal resources. A crucial part of becoming whole is developing the internal resources that most people try to get from relationships. The capacity to self-soothe, to self-validate, to find meaning and joy independent of another person's presence or approval. Self-soothing is the ability to regulate your own emotional state. When you're anxious, can you calm yourself? When you're sad, can you offer yourself comfort? When you're afraid, can you provide yourself with a sense of safety? Or do you immediately reach for someone else to do this for you? Many people never developed this capacity because they always had someone else to regulate them. First parents, then friends, then romantic partners. They've externalized emotional regulation, which means they're perpetually vulnerable to whoever controls access to that regulation. Learning to self-soothe isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending you're fine when you're not. It's about developing a repertoire of practices that help you be with difficult emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them. This might be breath work, movement, meditation, journaling, time in nature. The specific practice matters less than the principle. You can help yourself. You're not helpless without another person. Self-validation is equally important. This is the capacity to trust your own perceptions, to affirm your own experience, to know your own worth without needing external confirmation. Most people are constantly seeking validation from others, approval, praise, reassurance, and this need for validation makes them vulnerable to manipulation and keeps them from trusting themselves. Developing self-validation means learning to check in with yourself first. When you're uncertain about something, before asking 10 other people what they think, you ask yourself, what do I think? What feels true to me? What do I know about this situation? It means learning to trust your own judgment even when others disagree. It means being able to say, I see how you see it differently, and I respect that, but this is what's true for me. It means recognizing that your worth isn't up for vote. Other people's opinions about you, positive or negative, don't determine your value. You have inherent worth simply by existing, independent of achievement, approval, or relationship status. Finding meaning and joy independent of romantic relationship is perhaps the most important resource. This means building a life that feels rich and full, even when you're single. deep friendships, meaningful work, creative pursuits, physical practices, spiritual exploration, community involvement, contribution to something larger than yourself. When your life has multiple sources of meaning, connection, and joy, romantic relationship becomes one expression of a rich life rather than the thing that makes life worth living. This completely changes the energy you bring to partnership. You're not desperate for someone to make your life meaningful. You already have a meaningful life. You're inviting someone to share it. The practice of presence. Perhaps the deepest work of coming home to yourself is developing genuine presence. The capacity to be fully here, in this moment, in your body, in your direct experience, rather than lost in thought about past or future. Most people spend very little time actually present. They're thinking about what happened yesterday, worrying about what might happen tomorrow, replaying conversations, rehearsing scenarios, judging their experience, planning their response. The mind is everywhere except here. This perpetual absence from the present moment is one reason people feel so disconnected from themselves. How can you know yourself if you're never actually present to yourself? Presence is cultivated through practice. Meditation is one path, learning to rest attention in direct sensory experience rather than thought. But presence can be cultivated in countless ways. Really tasting your food, really feeling your body as you move, really listening when someone speaks rather than planning your response, really seeing what's in front of you rather than over-labeling it with concepts. What presence reveals is something remarkable. In this moment, right now, you're actually okay. The suffering you carry is almost entirely about past or future. Regret, resentment, shame about the past, anxiety, fear, worry about the future. But in the immediacy of direct experience, this breath, this sensation, this moment, there's often a basic okayness. This isn't spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity. It's not pretending that real problems don't exist. It's recognizing that in the actual present moment, as opposed to the story about the present moment, you have everything you need to be okay right now. Developing this capacity for presence is foundational to love without attachment, because attachment lives in time. It's about securing the future, about making sure this feeling, this connection, this person doesn't disappear. It's about grasping, holding, controlling the flow of experience. But when you're genuinely present, there's nothing to grasp. There's just this conversation, this embrace, this moment of connection, and you can be fully in it without needing to hold on to it, without needing to make it permanent, without needing guarantees about what comes next. This is where the possibility of real freedom in love begins to emerge. Not the freedom of detachment or emotional unavailability, but the freedom of being so fully present that you're not enslaved by need for things to be different than they are. Part 5. Love from freedom. What freedom actually means. There's a common misunderstanding about what freedom means in the context of relationship. People imagine it means not caring, being emotionally unavailable, keeping people at a distance, as if freedom and intimacy are opposites. This misses the point entirely. Freedom in relationship doesn't mean freedom from relationship. It means freedom within relationship. It's the capacity to be fully present, fully intimate, fully loving, while remaining unshakably rooted in yourself. It's loving someone without needing them to be a certain way to maintain your internal equilibrium. Think about the difference. When you love from attachment, you're constantly worried about whether they still love you, whether they might leave, whether they're happy enough. You're monitoring their mood, managing their perception, trying to keep them satisfied. You can't relax because your security depends on their continued presence and approval. When you love from freedom, you're simply here with them. You're not monitoring or managing. You're present to what is. They're happy. You enjoy their happiness. They're struggling. You're there with them in their struggle. They need space. You give it without making it mean you're being abandoned. They want closeness. You meet them without losing yourself. The love isn't conditional on them being a certain way, because your well-being doesn't depend on them being a certain way. You love them because of who they are, not because of what they provide. This is a completely different quality of presence. It's relaxed, it's easeful, it's generous. There's no hidden agenda, no negotiating, no scorekeeping. You're not trying to get something or avoid something. You're just loving them. And paradoxically, this is where real intimacy becomes possible. Because when you're not desperate for someone to be a certain way, they can actually be themselves with you. They don't have to perform or manage your emotions. They can show you their full range, their joy and their sorrow, their strength and their vulnerability, their clarity and their confusion. Freedom also means you won't compromise your truth for them. This is crucial. When you love from attachment, you'll silence yourself, suppress your needs, tolerate mistreatment, anything to avoid the threat of losing them. You'll make yourself smaller, more palatable, less challenging. But when you love from freedom, you maintain your integrity. You speak your truth even when it creates conflict. You honor your boundaries even when they're disappointed. You remain faithful to yourself even at the risk of the relationship. But this isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. And it actually creates healthier relationships because it establishes you as a full person, a subject with your own interiority, not an object in service of their needs. The qualities of free love. Love that springs from freedom has distinct qualities that distinguish it from attachment-based love. First, it's unconditional, not in the sense of tolerating everything. Boundaries still exist, but in the sense that the love itself isn't conditional on the other person being a certain way, doing certain things, fulfilling certain roles. You love them for who they are, in their fullness, including their flaws and limitations. This unconditional quality creates enormous safety. The other person doesn't have to perform for you. They don't have to be perfect or hide their struggles. They can show you everything and know that your love won't disappear. Second, it's spacious. There's room in it for the other person to change, grow, explore, develop in their own direction. You're not trying to keep them fixed in the role that serves your needs. You're celebrating their becoming, even when it takes them in directions you wouldn't have chosen. This spaciousness is deeply respectful. It honors the other person's autonomy, their right to their own life, their own trajectory. It doesn't try to control or constrain or manage their development. Third, it's generous. When you love from freedom, you're not constantly calculating whether you're getting enough. You're not keeping score. You're not in a transactional mindset. You give because giving itself is fulfilling, because you have something to offer, because love naturally wants to express itself. This generosity creates a completely different dynamic in relationship. Instead of two people both trying to get their needs met while minimizing what they give, you have two people both giving freely. The relationship becomes abundant rather than scarce. Fourth, it's present. You're not constantly worried about the future, trying to secure guarantees, anxiously checking for signs of waning commitment. You're here now, enjoying what is, celebrating this moment of connection without needing to grasp it or make it permanent. This presence is its own form of intimacy. When you're truly here with someone, not distracted by anxiety about losing them, not planning your next move, not managing their perception, they can feel it. They can feel themselves being genuinely met. Fifth, it's honest. When you're not desperately attached, you can afford to be truthful. You can express your genuine thoughts and feelings without constantly filtering through, will this make them leave? You can disagree, challenge, question without terror of abandonment. This honesty creates real knowing. They actually know you, and you actually know them, because neither of you is performing. What emerges is authentic intimacy, rather than the illusion of intimacy that attachment-based relationships often create. The paradox of caring without attachment. Here's the paradox that confuses people. How do you care deeply about someone without being attached to them? The answer is that caring and attachment are not the same thing. In fact, attachment often prevents genuine caring because you're too busy managing your own anxiety to actually be present to the other person's experience. Caring means being genuinely interested in their well-being, their growth, their happiness. It means wanting good things for them. It means being willing to show up for them when they're struggling. It means letting their joy bring you joy and their pain touch your heart. But caring from freedom means all of this without making their well-being responsible for your well-being. You can want them to be happy without needing them to be happy for you to be okay. You can support them through difficulty without it devastating you. You can celebrate their joy without needing to be the source of it. Consider the difference. When you're attached, your partner being unhappy triggers your own anxiety. You become invested in fixing their unhappiness, not primarily because you care about them, but because you can't regulate your own state while they're dysregulated. You need them to be okay so you can be okay. When you care from freedom, your partner being unhappy still touches you. You're not indifferent, but it doesn't devastate you. You can be present to their experience without making it about you. You can offer support without needing to fix them. You can trust their capacity to move through difficulty. This is actually far more helpful to them because they are not responsible for managing your anxiety about their unhappiness. They can just be where they are, and you can be with them there. The same principle applies to boundaries. When you love from freedom, you can maintain boundaries without attachment to whether they like your boundaries. You can say no to things that don't work for you without needing them to understand or agree. You can honor your own limits without guilt. This seems contradictory. How can you deeply care about someone and still say no to them? But actually, healthy boundaries are an expression of caring. They maintain the integrity of both people. They prevent resentment. They ensure that what you give freely rather than from obligation or fear. Love as gift rather than transaction. Perhaps the clearest distinction between free love and attached love is this. Free love is fundamentally a gift. Attached love is fundamentally a transaction. When you love as gift, you're offering something, your presence, your care, your appreciation, without expectation of return. The offering itself is complete. Whether they reciprocate, whether they stay, whether they give you what you want is separate from the gift you're giving. This doesn't mean you accept mistreatment or stay in relationships where you're not valued. It means the love itself isn't contingent on getting something back. You can love someone and still choose to leave if the relationship isn't working. The love doesn't obligate you to stay, and leaving doesn't negate the love. When you love as transaction, there's always a subtle negotiation happening. I give you affection, you give me security. I give you support, you give me validation. I meet your needs, you meet mine. It's not usually conscious or explicit, but it's there, and it creates constant assessment. Am I getting enough? Are they holding up their end? This transactional quality kills intimacy because you're not actually relating to each other as people. You're relating to each other as providers of services. The moment someone fails to provide what you need, the relationship feels threatened. Gift-based love is entirely different. You love them because loving them is its own reward. You enjoy their presence. You appreciate who they are. You want to contribute to their life, and you do so freely, not because you're owed something in return, but because giving is how love expresses itself. From this place, if they choose to leave, it's painful, but it doesn't invalidate what you shared. You still gave what you gave. They still received what they received. The value of what occurred doesn't depend on it lasting forever. This might sound like setting yourself up for being taken advantage of, but actually the opposite is true. When you love as gift, you're much clearer about what you're willing to give and what you're not. You're not giving from obligation or fear, so you're not building resentment. You're giving what you genuinely want to give, and you're clear when you're not willing to give more. and you attract different kinds of relationships. People who are looking for someone to use will be repelled by this energy. They can sense you're not available for transaction, but people who are also capable of loving as gift will recognize this quality and meet you there. Part 6. The Transformation of Intimacy. When two free people meet. Something remarkable happens when two people who've each done the work of coming home to themselves meet in relationship. The entire architecture of the partnership is different. Neither person is looking to the other to complete them, to fix them, to make them whole. They're both already whole, so the relationship isn't about filling lack. It's about sharing abundance. Neither person is dependent on the other for their sense of worth, safety, or identity, so there's no desperate clinging, no possessiveness, no need to control. Each person has their own life, their own interests, their own sense of meaning. The relationship is something they choose daily, not something they need for survival. This creates a spaciousness that's impossible in attachment-based relationships. There's room for each person to be fully themselves. There's room for individuality, for growth in different directions, for having separate friends and interests. The togetherness isn't about merging into one or losing yourself in the other. It's about two distinct beings choosing to share their journey. Paradoxically, this creates deeper intimacy than attachment ever can. Because each person can be authentic. They're not performing, not managing the other's perception, not suppressing parts of themselves. They can show up fully, strengths and weaknesses, clarity and confusion, joy and pain, and trust that it won't drive the other person away. The conflicts that arise, and they still arise, have a different quality. Neither person is fighting for their survival, so they can actually listen to each other. They can be curious about the other's perspective. They can admit when they're wrong. They can compromise without feeling like they're losing themselves. The differences between them, and there will be differences, aren't threats. They're interesting. They're opportunities to see the world from another vantage point, to be challenged in their thinking, to grow. And the love that flows between them is clean. It's not contaminated by need, by fear, by the 1,000 subtle manipulations that attachment creates. It's simply love, appreciation, care, delight in the other's existence. The ongoing practice. But here's what's crucial to understand. This isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a practice. Even when you've done deep work on yourself, even when you've established wholeness independent of relationship, attachment patterns can still activate. You can be genuinely free and still have moments of feeling threatened when your partner gets close to someone attractive. Still have moments of anxiety when they seem distant. Still have moments of wanting to control something to feel more secure. The difference is that instead of these patterns running you unconsciously, you can see them arising. You can notice, oh, there's that old fear of abandonment. There's that impulse to grasp, to control. And you can choose not to act from that place. This requires ongoing vigilance, ongoing honesty with yourself. It requires catching yourself when you start to make your partner responsible for your internal state. It requires noticing when you're in transaction rather than gift. It requires coming back to presence when you drift into anxiety about the future. It also requires ongoing work on yourself outside the relationship, maintaining your own practices, your own friendships, your own sources of meaning and connection, continuing to develop your capacity for self-awareness, self-regulation, self-compassion. Because the pull toward attachment is strong. The temptation to relax back into depending on your partner for your sense of security is always there. Without ongoing practice, it's easy to gradually slide back into patterns of dependency, possessiveness, need. This practice also involves actively choosing the relationship daily. When you're not attached, when you know you'd be okay without the relationship, staying becomes a genuine choice rather than a compulsion. Every day you're answering the question, do I want to be here? And when the answer is yes, that yes has real meaning. The freedom to leave, the freedom to stay. One of the most powerful aspects of love from freedom is that it includes within it the freedom to leave. Not as a threat, not as a manipulation, but as a genuine recognition that you're choosing to be here rather than being trapped here. When you know you could leave, when you genuinely know that you'd survive, that you'd be okay, that leaving is a real option, your staying has integrity. You're not staying because you're afraid to be alone. You're not staying because you've invested so much you can't imagine starting over. You're not staying because you don't know who you'd be without this person. You're staying because you want to. This transforms the quality of commitment. It's no longer about obligation or fear or need. It's about genuine choice, and that choice can be made fresh each day. This doesn't make relationships unstable. Paradoxically, it makes them more stable, because when each person knows they could leave and is choosing to stay, there's enormous power in that choice. There's no resentment about being trapped. There's no wondering what else might be out there because you're here by authentic choice. It also creates accountability. When you know your partner could leave, you're motivated to actually show up well in the relationship, not from fear, but from genuine care. You don't take them for granted. You don't assume they'll tolerate anything. You're invested in creating something worth choosing. And if the relationship does end, if one person chooses to leave, it's devastating but not annihilating. You miss them. You grieve what's been lost. You feel the pain of separation. But your sense of self doesn't collapse. Your life doesn't fall apart. You carry your wholeness with you into whatever comes next. This capacity to survive ending is what makes genuine love possible during the relationship, because you're not holding on from fear of loss. You're present from choice, and that presence is everything. Multiplying rather than completing. Here's a beautiful mathematical metaphor for the difference between attachment-based and freedom-based love. Attachment-based love is addition. You're 0.5, they're 0.5, and together you make 1. Each person is incomplete, and the relationship is about adding together to create wholeness. This means if one person leaves, you return to being 0.5, incomplete, insufficient, half of something. Freedom-based love is multiplication. You're 1, they're 1, and together you create something greater than 2. Each person is already whole, and the relationship is about what becomes possible when two whole beings come together. The shared life you create, the growth you catalyze in each other, the joy you generate together. It's multiplicative rather than additive. And if one person leaves, you don't return to incompleteness. You remain one. You're still whole. You're changed by what you shared. You carry what you learned, but you're not broken. This multiplicative quality is what makes free love so generative. When two whole people come together, they create possibilities that neither could create alone. They amplify each other's strengths. They compensate for each other's limitations, not because either person needs compensating, but because partnership allows for a richer expression. They challenge each other to grow in ways they wouldn't grow alone, not because either is insufficient, but because encountering another perspective, another way of being, another vision of what's possible expands what each person can become. They create a shared life, shared memories, shared jokes, shared rituals, shared meaning that becomes its own entity, not a merging where both lose themselves, but a creation where both contribute their fullness. This is what becomes possible when love springs from freedom rather than need, not a desperate clinging to avoid annihilation, but a joyful collaboration between two sovereign beings. Part 7. Navigating the challenges. When one person is free and the other attached. What happens when you've done this work, when you've come home to yourself and learned to love from freedom, but you're in relationship with someone who hasn't? This is a common and difficult situation. You're no longer operating from need, no longer looking to them to complete you. no longer willing to abandon yourself to keep them close, but they're still in attachment patterns, still needing constant reassurance, still monitoring your every move for signs of abandonment, still compromising themselves to keep you satisfied. The asymmetry creates friction. Your freedom can feel threatening to them. When you're comfortable with space, they experience it as distance. When you're honest about your needs, they hear rejection. When you maintain your boundaries, they feel abandoned. They might accuse you of being cold, unavailable, uncommitted. They might escalate their attachment behaviors, becoming clingier, more demanding, more anxious, trying to pull you back into the familiar dance. They might interpret your wholeness as not loving them enough. This is painful for both people. They feel insecure, constantly anxious about losing you. You feel constrained, unable to be yourself without triggering their fears. The relationship becomes exhausting. There are essentially 3 paths forward. First, you can invite them into their own journey of coming home to themselves, not by lecturing or being superior, but by modeling it. By maintaining your own wholeness while remaining loving, by holding boundaries while remaining compassionate, by not getting hooked into their anxiety while staying present to their experience. Sometimes witnessing someone else's freedom catalyzes their own journey. They start to notice the correlation between their attachment patterns and their suffering. They become curious about a different way. They begin their own work. But this requires patience and the recognition that you can't do their work for them. You can hold space, you can reflect what you notice, you can share your own process, but their awakening is theirs to achieve. Second, you can continue in the relationship while accepting its limitations. You maintain your own freedom and wholeness while being compassionate about where they are. You don't try to fix them or change them. You simply love them as they are while honoring your own boundaries. This can work if the attachment patterns aren't too severe and if there's enough goodness in the relationship to make it worthwhile. But it requires real clarity about what you're choosing and why. You can't be resentful about their limitations. You have to genuinely accept them. Third, you can recognize that the relationship isn't compatible with where you are now and choose to leave. This isn't about them being wrong or bad. It's about recognizing that your freedom and their attachment create a dynamic that's painful for both of you. This is often the most honest choice when there's a significant gap in where each person is in their development. It's honoring that you've both outgrown what the relationship can hold. Whatever path you choose, the key is maintaining your own freedom while remaining compassionate. Their attachment isn't personal. It's their pattern, their history, their unfinished work. You don't have to sacrifice your wholeness to accommodate it, but you also don't have to judge them for it. Recognizing spiritual bypassing. As you do this work of coming home to yourself and learning to love from freedom, there's a trap worth naming: spiritual bypassing. This is using spiritual concepts or practices to avoid dealing with genuine emotional needs, attachment wounds, or relationship difficulties. It looks like this: using non-attachment as an excuse for emotional unavailability, claiming you're being present when you're actually avoiding commitment, calling someone else needy when they're simply expressing normal human desires for closeness and consistency, using freedom as justification for being inconsiderate or unreliable. Real freedom in love isn't cold. It's not distant. It's not using spiritual concepts to protect yourself from genuine intimacy. Real freedom is warm, present, engaged. It's being able to show up fully while remaining rooted in yourself. The difference is subtle, but important. Someone who's genuinely free can be deeply intimate, can make commitments, can show up consistently, can honor their word. They're not afraid of closeness. They're just not enslaved by it. Someone who's bypassing uses freedom as a shield against vulnerability. They keep people at a distance under the guise of spiritual development. They avoid the actual work of learning to be in relationship healthily by claiming they've transcended the need for relationship. You can recognize bypassing in yourself by checking, am I using these concepts to avoid feeling something difficult? Am I using freedom as an excuse for not showing up? Am I judging others as attached when they're simply expecting basic relational consistency? The work of coming home to yourself should make you more capable of genuine intimacy, not less. It should make you more available for real relationship, not more defended against it. If you're becoming increasingly isolated, increasingly unable to be vulnerable, increasingly dismissive of others' needs, that's not freedom, that's avoidance. The spiral path. It's worth naming that this journey isn't linear. You don't do the work once and then exist in perfect freedom forever. You'll have regressions. You'll find yourself in attachment patterns you thought you'd transcended. You'll discover new layers of need, new areas of incompleteness, new ways you're using relationship to avoid yourself. This is normal. This is the spiral path of development. You circle back to similar issues, but at different levels of understanding. Each time you encounter them, you have an opportunity to go deeper, to see more clearly, to choose more consciously. What changes is your relationship to the patterns. Instead of being unconsciously run by them, you start to see them arising. Instead of judging yourself for having them, you get curious about what they're revealing. Instead of acting from them automatically, you create space to choose differently. This requires real gentleness with yourself. The patterns are old, deep, survival-based. They won't disappear just because you've understood them intellectually. They'll continue to activate, sometimes intensely, particularly in relationships that touch your core wounds. The practice is noticing them without judgment, understanding what they're trying to protect you from, and gradually developing the capacity to meet that need for protection in a healthier way. It's also being honest when you are activated, when you are in attachment, when you are acting from fear. Sometimes the most free thing you can do is simply acknowledge, I'm in my pattern right now. I'm feeling anxious about losing you, and I know that's my attachment activating. I'm going to take some space to work with this rather than acting from it. This honesty itself is freedom. You're not pretending to be more evolved than you are. You're not performing spiritual maturity. You're simply being truthful about where you are in this moment. Part 8. The Fullness of Love. The all-inclusive nature of freedom-based love. One of the most beautiful qualities of love from freedom is its inclusiveness. When you're no longer desperately clinging to one person to meet all your needs, love becomes available in multiple forms, multiple directions. You can love your romantic partner deeply and also have nourishing friendships. You can appreciate beauty in strangers without it threatening your primary relationship. You can feel genuine affection for people without needing it to be romantic. You can celebrate others' talents, others' joy, others' success without it diminishing you. This inclusiveness doesn't mean diffusion or lack of commitment. It means the love isn't constrained by fear. You're not rationing love as if there's a limited supply. You're not withholding appreciation from others to prove your devotion to your partner. Instead, love becomes like breath, abundant, natural, something that flows freely rather than something you have to control and manage. You can appreciate your partner's friend without jealousy because your security doesn't depend on being the only person your partner values. You can feel attracted to someone else without guilt because attraction doesn't threaten your genuine commitment. This inclusiveness also means you're not asking any single relationship to fulfill every need. Your romantic partner doesn't have to be your best friend, your intellectual companion, your adventure buddy, your therapist, your spiritual guide, and your entertainment all in one. They can be who they are, and you can meet other needs through other connections. This actually strengthens romantic partnerships. When you're not demanding that one person be everything for you, there's less pressure, less resentment, less disappointment. You can appreciate what they do offer without constantly focusing on what they don't. Different expressions, same source. Love from freedom has different expressions depending on context. Romantic love, parental love, friendship, love for humanity, love of beauty, spiritual love, but they all spring from the same source. Your capacity to appreciate, to connect, to care without needing to control or possess. Romantic love has its own flavor, the Aeros, the desire for physical intimacy, the delight in partnership. But when it comes from freedom, it shares the essential qualities of all free love: presence, appreciation, generosity, lack of agenda. Parental love demonstrates this beautifully. Healthy parents love their children without needing the children to be a certain way to maintain their own sense of worth. They want their children to thrive, to be themselves, to grow in their own direction, even when that direction is different from what the parents imagined. They provide support without demanding reciprocation. They maintain boundaries while remaining deeply connected. This is the quality that can infuse romantic love when it comes from freedom. Not that romantic partnership should be like parenting, but that the fundamental stance is similar. Unconditional appreciation, genuine desire for the other's flourishing, love that doesn't demand reciprocation in any particular form. Friendship shows another aspect. True friends love each other without ownership. They celebrate each other's other relationships. They support each other's growth, even in directions that lead apart. They're present when needed without keeping score. They can be honest without fear of abandonment. Romantic love from freedom carries this same quality: the lack of ownership, the support for independent growth, the honesty without fear. Even the love of beauty or nature demonstrates something essential. When you encounter a sunset, you don't try to possess it. You don't demand that it last forever. You don't make it responsible for your happiness. You simply appreciate it fully while it's here. This is the stance that becomes possible with people when you love from freedom. Full appreciation of what is, without grasping, without demanding it be different or last forever. The role of Aeros and desire. A common concern about love without attachment is whether it loses passion, whether it becomes bland or safe or lacking in intensity. Doesn't freedom mean you don't care as much? Doesn't non-attachment kill desire? Actually, the opposite is true. Attachment kills genuine Eros because attachment is fundamentally about control and security. Eros requires mystery, space, otherness. It requires seeing the other person as genuinely other, not as an extension of yourself or a supplier of your needs. When you're attached, you're constantly trying to know everything, to predict everything, to control everything about your partner, to maintain your sense of security. You monitor their phone, track their movements, demand detailed accounts of their day. You're trying to eliminate mystery and uncertainty because mystery and uncertainty trigger your fear. But Eros dies in this environment. Eros requires that the other person remains somewhat unknown, that there's always more to discover. It requires respecting their separateness, their autonomy, their right to their own inner life. Freedom creates the conditions for Eros to flourish. When you're not desperately clinging, when you trust both yourself and them, you can relax into appreciating their otherness. You can be surprised by them. You can discover new aspects of who they are. Desire, genuine desire, springs from this appreciation of the other as other, not need. Need isn't desire, it's desperation, not dependency. Dependency isn't erotic, it's anxiety. But real desire, the pull toward another person's body, being energy, this is fully available in freedom. In fact, it's more available because it's cleaner. It's not contaminated by all the fear, control, and manipulation that attachment creates. It's pure appreciation, pure pull, pure celebration of physical and emotional connection. The intensity is there, perhaps more so, but it has a different quality. It's not the intensity of desperation, of clinging, of needing to merge. It's the intensity of full presence, of two sovereign beings choosing to meet in intimacy, of genuine encounter between distinct persons. When the relationship ends. Despite doing all this work, despite loving from freedom, relationships can still end, and when they do, it hurts. Freedom doesn't make you immune to grief, but the quality of the grief is different. It's clean pain rather than complicated pain. You're sad about the loss itself, not about losing yourself or losing your sense of worth or security. You miss them, not because you need them to be complete, but because you genuinely valued what you shared. This allows you to grieve without all the additional layers of suffering that attachment creates. You're not spiraling into self-blame. What did I do wrong? How could I have prevented this? You're not falling into despair. I'll never love again. I can't survive without them. You're not consumed by bitterness. How could they do this to me after everything I gave? You're simply sad. You're honoring what was, acknowledging what's been lost, feeling the real pain of separation without all the stories that amplify pain into suffering. And because you maintained your wholeness throughout the relationship, you still have your life, your friendships, your work, your practices, your connection to yourself. All of it remains. The relationship ending doesn't mean your whole life collapses. It means one important part of your life is changing. You can also appreciate what the relationship taught you, the ways you grew, the experiences you shared, the love you gave and received. The ending doesn't invalidate what was. You can hold gratitude alongside grief. Most importantly, you can eventually be genuinely happy for your former partner if they find happiness elsewhere. This might take time, but it becomes possible because you weren't possessing them. You wanted them to be happy. That desire doesn't disappear just because their happiness is no longer with you. This capacity to let go while maintaining love, to wish someone well, even as you grieve their absence, is perhaps the ultimate expression of freedom in love. It's love without conditions, love without agenda, love as pure gift. Part 9. Practical integration. Daily practices for cultivating freedom in love. Understanding the philosophy of love without attachment intellectually is one thing. Living it is another. The gap between knowing and being is bridged through practice, concrete daily actions that gradually rewire your nervous system and reshape your relational patterns. The first practice is the practice of solitude, not isolation, but deliberate time alone with yourself. This might be a daily walk without headphones, a morning sitting in silence before the day begins, an evening of reading rather than scrolling. The key is regularity and intentionality. You're not just alone because circumstances left you alone, but choosing solitude as a practice. During this time, notice what arises. Notice the impulse to reach for your phone, to make plans, to fill the space. Notice the restlessness, the anxiety, the voice that says you should be doing something productive. Notice also the moments of ease, of genuine enjoyment of your own company, of interesting thoughts that arise in the spaciousness. Over time, this practice builds your capacity to be with yourself. The anxiety lessens, the restlessness settles. You start to find that solitude is nourishing rather than threatening. And this fundamentally changes your relationship with partnership. You're choosing it from fullness rather than fleeing into it from emptiness. The second practice is the practice of witnessing your patterns throughout the day, particularly in interactions with your partner or when thinking about relationship. Notice when attachment patterns activate. Notice the anxiety when they don't text back immediately. Notice the impulse to check where they are. Notice the way you monitor their mood to gauge your own safety. Notice the small compromises you make to avoid conflict. Don't judge these observations. Don't try to immediately change them. Just witness. Oh, there's that anxiety again. There's that need for reassurance. There's that fear of abandonment. Simply naming what you notice creates space between you and the pattern. You're no longer identified with it. You're the awareness that notices it. The third practice is the practice of self-inquiry. When attachment patterns activate strongly, take time to investigate them. Ask yourself, what am I actually afraid of? What do I think will happen if I don't get what I want? What need is driving this? Follow the thread of inquiry deeper. Often what seems to be about your partner is actually about something much older, something from your early attachment history. For instance, you feel intense anxiety when your partner wants to spend an evening with friends. Instead of acting on the anxiety, guilting them, picking a fight, creating a reason they need to stay, you inquire into it. What's this anxiety actually about? What do I fear? Perhaps you discover it's not about this particular evening. It's about a deep fear that if you're not constantly available and pleasing, people will leave. That fear might have roots in childhood experiences of love being conditional on good behavior. This inquiry creates understanding and compassion for yourself. You're not wrong or broken for having these patterns. You developed them for good reason, but now you can see them clearly enough to start choosing differently. The fourth practice is the practice of conscious response rather than automatic reaction. Once you can witness your patterns and understand their origins, you can start to create space between stimulus and response. Your partner does something that triggers your attachment anxiety. Instead of immediately reacting from that anxiety, you pause, you breathe, you feel the anxiety in your body without needing to act on it immediately. In that pause, you can ask, how do I want to respond? Not from fear, but from my highest values. Not from my wound, but from my wholeness. And then you choose your response consciously. Maybe you still need to have a conversation with your partner, but you have it from a calm place rather than from activated anxiety. Maybe you realize you don't need to say anything at all. The trigger was entirely about your pattern, not about their behavior. This practice is difficult at first. The gap between trigger and reaction can feel impossibly short, but like any practice, it develops with repetition. The pause gets longer. Your capacity to sit with discomfort without needing to act on it immediately grows. Your responses become more conscious, more aligned with who you want to be rather than who your wounds make you. The fifth practice is the practice of radical honesty. This means being truthful with yourself and your partner about what you're experiencing, including your attachment patterns. Instead of hiding your insecurity or pretending you're more evolved than you are, you share it honestly. I notice I'm feeling anxious about you spending time with your ex, and I know that's my pattern activating. I'm working with it, but I wanted to be honest about what I'm experiencing. This vulnerability actually creates intimacy. It shows your partner your humanity, and it keeps your patterns from operating unconsciously, where they're more likely to create destructive behavior. This honesty extends to your needs and boundaries. You don't suppress your needs to be low maintenance or easy. You don't abandon your boundaries to avoid conflict. You speak your truth clearly and directly, even when it's uncomfortable. This is how you maintain your integrity within relationship. Creating space for individual growth. One of the most important practical aspects of maintaining freedom in love is ensuring both people have space for individual development. This isn't about keeping your lives separate, but about recognizing that you're each on your own journey of becoming, and the health of your relationship depends on honoring that. This means maintaining separate interests and friendships, not as a statement against the relationship, but as recognition that you're a full person with needs for connection, stimulation, and growth that can't all be met by one person. Your partner can't be your only friend, your only intellectual companion, your only source of fun and adventure. That's too much weight for any relationship to bear. When you have your own interests, you bring fresh energy back to the relationship. You have things to talk about. You remain interesting to each other. You're not solely focused on the relationship itself, which can make the relationship claustrophobic. This also means supporting each other's growth even when it leads in different directions. Your partner wants to pursue a degree that will require significant time and energy. Instead of feeling threatened by how this might change the relationship, you support it because you want them to become who they're becoming, even if that means less time together or shifts in how you relate, or you're growing in ways that make you less compatible than you once were. Instead of trying to hold each other fixed in old patterns to maintain the relationship, you acknowledge the divergence honestly. Sometimes growth means growing together in new ways. Sometimes it means growing apart. Both are valid. The key is that neither person stunts their own development for the sake of the relationship, because a relationship built on mutual limitation isn't sustainable or healthy. You'll eventually resent each other for what you gave up. But a relationship that celebrates and supports each person's full development becomes a genuine partnership, two people contributing their best selves to something shared. Navigating difficult emotions without making them your partner's responsibility. A crucial skill in freedom-based love is learning to navigate difficult emotions without automatically making your partner responsible for fixing them or causing them. When you feel sad, instead of immediately going to your partner for comfort, you first sit with the sadness yourself. You inquire into what it's about. You provide yourself with some of the comfort you need. Then, if you want to share it with your partner, you share it as something you're experiencing rather than something they need to fix. I'm feeling sad today. I'm not sure exactly why. I just wanted to share that with you. I'm taking care of myself, but I appreciate you knowing what I'm going through. This is completely different from, make me feel better, fix this for me. It's intolerable that I feel this way. When you feel angry, instead of immediately blaming your partner, you check, is this anger actually about what just happened, or am I projecting? What am I really angry about? Sometimes the anger is legitimate. They did something that genuinely warrants anger, but often the intensity of the anger is disproportionate because it's touching something older, something unresolved. When you can distinguish between legitimate anger at a present situation and anger that's coming from your history, you can communicate much more effectively. When you cancelled our plans last minute, I felt angry, and I noticed this is touching something from my childhood about feeling unimportant. Can we talk about it? This is vastly more productive than unleashing rage on your partner for triggering your wound. When you feel anxious, instead of immediately seeking reassurance from your partner, you work with the anxiety yourself first. You sit with it, you breathe with it, you question it. Is this anxiety based in reality, or is it my pattern? What do I actually know to be true right now? Sometimes you'll discover the anxiety is legitimate. There's actually something happening in the relationship that needs to be addressed. But often you'll discover it's your attachment pattern activating based on old fears rather than present reality. When you can see that clearly, you can work with it yourself rather than demanding your partner continuously reassure you. This doesn't mean you never turn to your partner for support. It means you don't make them solely responsible for managing your emotional state. You develop the capacity to be with your own experience first, then you can invite them to be with you in it, which is a completely different dynamic than demanding they fix it. The practice of gratitude and appreciation. One of the most powerful practices for maintaining freedom in love is the regular practice of gratitude and appreciation, not as a technique to get something, but as a genuine orientation toward what is. Each day, you might take a moment to appreciate something about your partner. Not what they do for you, not how they make you feel, but something about who they are. Their kindness to strangers, their dedication to their work, the way they laugh, the the thoughtfulness they bring to difficult situations. This practice shifts your focus from what you're not getting to what's actually present. It cultivates genuine appreciation rather than constant assessment of whether your needs are being met, and it creates a generous atmosphere in the relationship. When both people are regularly noticing and appreciating each other, the relationship feels abundant rather than scarce. But this practice extends beyond your partner to your life as a whole. Appreciating your friendships, your work, your physical health, the beauty you encounter, the privileges you have. This broader gratitude creates a sense of fullness that makes you less likely to look to your relationship to provide everything. You can also practice appreciation for what your relationship has taught you, including the difficult parts. Appreciation for the ways conflict has revealed your patterns. Appreciation for how your partner's differences have challenged you to grow. Appreciation for what you're learning about yourself through this partnership. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending difficulties don't exist. It's about maintaining perspective. Alongside what's difficult, what's also good? What can you appreciate even in the midst of challenge? Maintaining your practices during relationship crisis. The real test of your freedom comes during relationship crisis, when your partner wants to leave, when trust has been broken, when you're in serious conflict. This is when attachment patterns activate most strongly, when the impulse to grasp, to control, to abandon yourself becomes overwhelming. This is precisely when you need your practices most. When the anxiety is intense, you need to remember to breathe, to sit with the discomfort without immediately acting on it. When you want to compromise all your boundaries to keep them from leaving, you need to remember your commitment to integrity. When you want to make it all their fault, you need to remember to examine your own contribution. This requires enormous courage, because in crisis, every instinct is screaming at you to do whatever it takes to secure safety. Your nervous system is activated. Your primitive brain thinks you're facing annihilation. And here you are, trying to remain conscious, trying to choose your response rather than just react. But this is also where the deepest transformation happens. When you can maintain your center even in crisis, when you can remain true to yourself even when terrified of loss, when you can stay open even when you want to close down, you discover a freedom you didn't know was possible. This might mean having a difficult conversation even though you're afraid of the outcome. It might mean maintaining a boundary even though it risks the relationship ending. It might mean being honest about your own contribution to the problem, even though you want to blame them. It might mean accepting that the relationship might end while still showing up with love and integrity. The practice here is remembering. Your wholeness doesn't depend on this relationship continuing. You will survive whatever happens. The worst case scenario, the relationship ending, is painful, but not annihilating. From this recognition, you can navigate the crisis from your values rather than from your fears. Building a rich life outside romance. Perhaps the most important practical foundation for love without attachment is building a genuinely rich life that includes but isn't centered on romantic relationship. This means investing in deep friendships, relationships where you can be fully yourself, where you share history and understanding, where you give and receive support, friends who know you well, who call you out when needed, who celebrate your joys and hold you through sorrows. Not just acquaintances or activity partners, but genuine friends. It means engaging in meaningful work that uses your gifts, that contributes something you value, that gives you a sense of purpose beyond your relationship. This doesn't have to be your job, though ideally it is. It might be creative work, volunteer work, a side project, something that matters to you, that you're building, that gives your life meaning. It means developing creative or physical practices, things you do for the joy of doing them, not to achieve anything. Playing music, making art, writing, hiking, dancing, gardening, practices that connect you to your body, to beauty, to flow states, to the pleasure of full engagement. It means having a spiritual or philosophical framework, some way of making meaning, of connecting to something larger than your individual life. This might be formal religious practice or something more personal, but something that helps you contextualize your experience, that provides perspective when you're caught in the drama of everyday life. It means maintaining your physical health, moving your body, feeding it well, getting adequate sleep. This isn't about vanity or perfection, it's about honoring the vehicle through which you experience life, creating conditions for well-being. When you have all of this, romantic relationship becomes one thread in a rich tapestry rather than the whole tapestry, and this fundamentally changes the quality of your relating. You're not asking your partner to be your entire world, you're inviting them to be part of a world that's already full. Conclusion: the paradox resolved. We began with a question: how is it possible to love without attachment? And we've explored an answer that's both simple and complex, both obvious and paradoxical. The answer is that you love from wholeness rather than lack, from freedom rather than fear, from being rather than becoming. You do the work of coming home to yourself so thoroughly that another person's presence or absence doesn't determine your fundamental okayness. And from that foundation, you love not as a desperate reaching for completion, but as a natural expression of your wholeness. This doesn't mean you don't care deeply. It doesn't mean you don't feel intensely. It doesn't mean you don't grieve loss or celebrate presence. It means all of this happens without the contamination of need, without the violence of grasping, without the suffering of attachment. The paradox resolves itself when you understand that attachment and love are not the same thing. Attachment is about what you can get. Love is about what you can give. Attachment is about security. Love is about celebration. Attachment is about fear. Love is about freedom. You can love someone with your whole heart while knowing you'd survive their leaving. You can commit fully while maintaining your autonomy. You can be deeply intimate while remaining rooted in yourself. These aren't contradictions. They're the natural expressions of mature love. The journey there requires real work. It requires examining your patterns, your wounds, your dependencies. It requires developing internal resources, the capacity to self-soothe, to self-validate, to find meaning and joy independent of romantic relationship. It requires building a life rich enough that romantic partnership is one source of connection among many rather than the only source. It requires the ongoing practice of presence, of coming back to this moment rather than living in anxiety about the future. It requires catching yourself when attachment patterns activate and choosing differently. It requires the humility to recognize when you're using relationship to flee from yourself and the courage to stop. But the freedom that emerges is worth every bit of the work, because from that freedom you can love in a way that's clean, generous, joyful. You can be genuinely intimate because you're not defending against vulnerability. You can celebrate another person fully because you're not trying to possess them. You can give without keeping score because you're not transacting for security. And if you're fortunate enough to meet another person who's also found this freedom, what becomes possible is remarkable. Two whole people creating something together that neither could create alone, loving each other deeply while remaining themselves, committed fully while free completely. This is the love that doesn't create suffering. This is the love that springs from your being rather than your becoming. This is the love that's all-inclusive, that has space for private intimacy and universal compassion, that can hold both passionate desire and ultimate freedom. The questioner speaks of 90% of their suffering coming from love. This is the suffering of attachment, of loving from need, from fear, from the desperate attempt to escape incompleteness through another person. It's suffering that comes from mistaking attachment for love, from building your life on the foundation of someone else's continued presence. But there's another way, a way that includes all the beauty of love, the intimacy, the passion, the connection, the devotion, without the suffering that attachment creates. It requires coming home to yourself first. It requires recognizing that you were never incomplete. It requires learning to love as gift rather than transaction. And when you find that way, when you establish yourself in that freedom, love becomes what it was always meant to be. Not a solution to your suffering, but an expression of your wholeness. Not something you desperately need, but something you joyfully share. Not a rescue from incompleteness, but a celebration of what's already complete. This is the possibility that exists for anyone willing to do the work. Not a life without love, but a life where love flows from freedom rather than fear, where relationships enhance an already full life rather than attempting to create fullness where none exists, where another person can leave and you remain whole, where they can stay and you remain yourself. The mind will try to limit this, to make it about romantic partnership or about avoiding relationship altogether. But what's being pointed to is far more expansive. It's a fundamental orientation toward life itself, meeting whatever arises with presence rather than grasping, with appreciation rather than possession, with love rather than fear. In romantic relationships, in friendships, in work, in encountering beauty, in every interaction, you can bring this quality of freedom, not as detachment or indifference, but as the deepest possible engagement, uncorrupted by the need for things to be different than they are. This is what's possible. This is what awaits on the other side of the work. Not the absence of love, but love freed from the prison of attachment. Not less feeling, but cleaner feeling. Not less commitment, but truer commitment. Not less intimacy, but real intimacy. Finally possible because you're no longer too defended, too desperate, too lost in need to truly meet another person. The journey is worth taking, the freedom is real, and the love that becomes possible from that freedom is richer than anything attachment could ever create. You don't have to choose between loving deeply and remaining free. You don't have to compromise your truth to keep someone close. You don't have to sacrifice yourself to avoid aloneness. You can love with your whole heart while remaining whole yourself. This is the answer to the question, not a technique or a strategy, but a way of being. Not something you achieve once, but something you practice daily. Not a destination, but a direction. And every step in that direction is a movement toward freedom, toward authentic love, toward the end of suffering in relationship, toward a life where love enhances your wholeness rather than attempting to create it, where another person's presence is celebrated rather than desperately clung to, where loss is grieved but doesn't destroy you, where love, finally freed from the burden of attachment, can be what it always wanted to be: pure gift, pure appreciation, pure celebration of connection between two sovereign beings who choose each other daily from freedom rather than need. This is possible, this is real, this is waiting for anyone willing to come home to themselves first, and then from that home reach out to another, not from desperation, but from overflow, not from lack, but from love.